Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar, Managing a Meeting. It's presented by Grow and Lead Community and Youth Development. We grow individual capacities through things like tonight's professional development webinar. It helps to build the skills in the nonprofit sector so we can all be more efficient and effective. So with that, I will pass it over to today's presenter, Amy Quinn, CEO here at Grow and Lead.
Thank you so much, Victoria, and thank you everyone for tuning in. Tonight, yes, we're going to talk about the purpose of the webinar is to provide information and tips to increase the productivity of your meetings, and the focus or the content is really going to be, the context is around board meetings because this is Board Development Month here at Grow and Lead, and meetings consume a great amount of time, but yet that's how business gets done. So we will talk about tips for efficient meetings. We'll cover different roles around the board meeting table. I'll share some tools that I know of to keep meetings on track. And then we're going to dip into just a little bit of parliamentary procedure and give you a taste of that as far as conducting business. If you tuned in last week, then you heard Chad talk about the legal board members' duties, and one of the duties is duties of care, and that's what we often call as the show-up duty, but it's not just show up, it's to be engaged and informed. And this is one of the examples for attending meetings. Having an effective meeting helps you be, and being prepared helps you be a good board member and adhere to your duty of care. So I found this quote when I was researching for this webinar, and I love it. A board functions as a board only when it is in session. So think about that. You are a unit, as Chad mentioned last week. So you only function when you're in session as far as a true board in making decisions and moving the organization forward. And so that means your meetings must be productive in order for the board to lead the organization effectively. So here are my tips for efficient meetings. I bet you're glad you dialed in here. But okay, let's be a little more specific other than just be prepared. First, start planning earlier rather than later. And there's a couple of things there. One, it should be the board chair or president, whatever you call your chief board member, and your chief executive officer or executive director or ED, whatever your highest level of staff person is. For those of you that have staff, together you set the board agenda. Another thing that can help is we have here at Grow and Lead, we use an annual calendar of board business. So every year we know at our different meetings, because we only meet quarterly, so which items of business must we transact legally to stay on task. That way, when we're developing the agenda, we know the must-haves, so to speak, for a meeting, and we can focus on developing an agenda more around strategic or programmatic discussions that we want to have. And rolling into that, you want to determine the meeting purpose. And just saying it's a board meeting is not a purpose. That's a meeting type, but it's not why are you having the meeting. We'll go into that a little more later. And like I said, set the agenda and then equip others to be prepared. Make sure you have meeting packets. If you're a board member, make sure they're given to you in advance, or if staff are responsible for getting those distributed, get meeting packets distributed far enough in advance that board members have a chance to look over it and be prepared. You know, we as nonprofit staff, we are not doing our board a favor, and we're not doing ourselves a favor. We're not equipping them to perform their duty of care and to truly lead the organization forward if we aren't prepping them or equipping them for the board. You can also have with your packets either cover letters or emails that highlight special instructions or requests. There's a lot of times that before a meeting, I'll send out a document that even though it's in their board packet, I will email it to all of them as well and say, hey, I just wanted to call your attention to this because it's a new business item that we need to discuss, and I want you to be prepared for it. And I don't consider that holding hands or putting down my board by any means. I feel like that is equipping them to do their job. And I appreciate that they come to our meetings prepared and ready to discuss. So I talked about determining your meeting purpose, and really think about, why are you meeting? And if it is simply to conduct legal business, such as approve a budget or whatnot, then maybe you can scale down the time, the length of your meeting, because some of those things don't always have to take so long. But why are you meeting? And really think through, okay, what do you want to talk about? What do you want to discuss that you haven't already discussed, and especially decided on or discovered? So in other words, are you rehashing things in your meetings over and over without making a decision and moving forward? Board members, sometimes you have to make difficult decisions, and that's being a leader, that's being a good, prudent board member. And so you don't want to rehash things, and you want to make sure that, what are we discuss? The things that we're discussing, are we making the best use of our time as a board? And then you want attendees to be able to say to their peers, when their peers ask, what happened at the meeting? You want them to be able to report, not only was business conducted, but decisions were made and new information was shared, and we did some board training, and we learned about XYZ, and we talked about industry trends. Now that's real, a big agenda. So those are just some examples of what you can do. And we have tools for you to help with setting agendas that we'll talk about in a minute. And so that's another part of being prepared, is, like I said, your board chair and your CEO together set the agenda. You align the agenda items with the purpose. So that's why you determine, okay, why are we having it? What do we want to accomplish? Begin with the end in mind. At the end of the meeting, what do we want to have accomplished? That's your purpose. Then you align your agenda items with that purpose. And you also look at, once you have your agenda items set, then go through it with these questions in mind. How much time are you spending on reporting of past events and programs, or updating them on events and programs, versus discussing future events and programs? How much are you doing reporting about what has already happened in the past versus reviewing your strategic plan or progress on your goals? And maybe educating the board or discussing trends and what may impact your organization in the future. Another thing on agendas is, it can be fun. Do a little icebreaker or something like that. It doesn't have to be serious in order to be able to conduct business. Professional doesn't necessarily mean serious. It really just depends on the culture of your organization. And some board training ideas could be about their legal duties, how to read your organization's financial statements and what they mean. Like we talked about, industry issues, things that the board is supposed to do, such as strategic planning or board recruitment, just getting into more detail the work of the board. I was at a meeting recently, and a guy came up to me and he said, I'm on 7 boards, and the 2 most high-performing boards, every meeting we have 10 minutes of board training before we start the meeting. And I thought, wow, that's great. So there's a testimonial for you. I don't think he'd mind me using his name either. It's Mike Fedrizzi from Blue Cross Blue Shield. Anyway, so agenda tips. You always want to include on the agenda, always include the meeting date, time, and location. And if you're using video conferencing or telephone conferencing, you want that information on the agenda as well. That seems like a no-brainer, but it is so easy, it tends to get overlooked. Use a consent agenda, and I'll explain that in a little bit, what a consent agenda is, but it's a way to save time in your meetings. instead of giving report after report of what's already happened, why don't you put that in the board packet, let the board members read it beforehand, and then you can save your meeting time to discuss items versus just having them listen to reports. Then I put here supporting documents, and that's, like I mentioned, any committee reports, any financial statements, the executive director or the CEO's report. We have at Grow and Lead what we call a dashboard, which is basically a snapshot update on our goals to date for our annual goals. Things like that are what we call supporting documents that we include with the agenda when we send out what we call the board packet. That makes up the packet. And I also put on here, visualize the meeting flow. And this is basically thinking through, when you set your agenda items, think through, okay, estimated timeline, how long would it take, do you think it may take for us to discuss this item and then discuss this item? And then, oh, you know what? We need to talk about our budget for next year. And I know a couple of board members are really upset that we didn't hit our goals last year. So how can we best facilitate that? Between, you know, this is the chair and the CEO talking together. How can we best facilitate this so that we have a robust discussion, but it doesn't get off track and real negative and just beating ourselves up over last year? Things like that. So visualize the meeting flow. I highly encourage you to sit down with your board chair, the CEOs and board chairs, sit down together and discuss the agenda and the facilitation of the meeting as well. And then of course, please make sure there's no surprises. No one likes surprises, even though they sound fun, maybe only surprise parties, but not in a boardroom. So here's an example of a meeting that Grow and Lead recently had. Excuse me just a minute. We had recently, and it may be hard to see on your screen, so the actual content isn't super important, other than I want to point out at the top we have our mission statement, and then we have that it's a board of directors meeting, the date, time, and location, video conferencing information. We have the order of business, and you'll see in the 1, 2, 3, 4. In the 5th bullet point, it says consent agenda. So basically, under the consent agenda, it says CEO report, minutes from the August 8th annual meeting, minutes from the September task force meeting and August task force meeting, October task force meeting, and then our quarterly financial statements. Instead of taking the time while everyone's at the meeting to go through all those reports, those are sent to board members usually a week in advance along with the agenda, and they know that they need to read through those and be ready to discuss those at the meeting. So when it comes time to of the agenda, let's see, we've called it to order, we've adopted the agenda, we had a volunteer read the mission statement, we do board member profiles so they can get to know each other a little better since we only meet 4 times a year. We've had a couple of members share about themselves. Now it comes time to the consent agenda. So what the facilitator does, what our chair does, is they say, you know, is there anyone or is there anything that needs to be pulled from the consent agenda? So for example, if a board member wasn't sure what something meant in the financial statement, that's where they could say, or I have a question, and that the question can be answered. Or if they think something's really off the rails and the financial statements need to be looked at separately, they could say, I want to remove the financial statements from the consent agenda. And then the board would vote on removing the financials, and assuming that was yes, then that becomes another agenda item. And then they say, you know, any other items, once everyone's happy with that all of those reports and everything are fine, then you say, I move to approve the consent agenda. And when you do that, you're approving all of those reports in one fell swoop. And so that's why it's a really nice time saver. So that's why I wanted to include our agenda, and this is what we call a public agenda. So this is the agenda that goes to every board member in every packet. Then we create a special agenda just for our chair, our board chair or vice chair, whoever is facilitating the meeting. And I cut off the top of this page so you could see more of the content. But at the top of the facilitator's agenda is the same thing. It's the mission statement, it's our name, it's the date, time, and location for the meeting. You know, all of that is the same. But then instead of having where it starts the items of business, this is what the facilitator's agenda looks like. And we have started at our board meetings doing a real small icebreaker. For example, in this was an October meeting, and so we had everyone go around the room and share what is their favorite fall activity. It sounds hokey, but since we only meet 4 times a year and some of our members are scattered throughout the UP, our board members actually like this, and it starts our meeting on a real informal, jovial tone, and it gives everyone a chance around the table to speak. So you know everyone is at least engaged. Then we call the meeting to order, and we have a reading of the mission statement. And so you'll notice in blue, Kevin was our chair at that time. I have notes for Kevin, and it says, Kevin, please ask a volunteer to read, to read the mission statement. And then we have adoption of the agenda, and that's something that the board needs to approve. They need to vote on. And so that's why it's in red, and that's why to the right it says action needed. Same with the consent agenda. And then we go to ongoing business or old business or former meeting, whatever you want to call it. And every meeting, we look at our board goals. Our board has their own set of goals. So I have these instructions to Kevin. Please ask the directors to turn to the back side of their agenda because that's where the board goals are listed. Please review each goal and discuss the goals to educate our new directors. So everyone's informed of what our goals are and where we're at as far as progress on our goals. Same with if you drop down to new business. We had a strategic discussion after our nonprofit conference to get perspectives from the board members that were present. Here again is my note to Kevin. Here are some of my thoughts, some of my questions. I hope you will facilitate this. Now, Kevin and I have already met about this. Well, actually, I can't remember, in all honest disclosure, I can't remember if we met, but I'm fairly certain we met about this. But I still put all those notes on there for him, so when he comes to the meeting, he has this printed color copy, and it helps him facilitate more efficiently. And you'll also notice in the very first column are times, and those are just suggested times, but having a schedule and a schedule for time is very important. And it really is up to you and your organization if only the facilitator has that or if you put it on the public agenda. There's no hard and fast rule there. But that's a facilitator agenda, and I really encourage you to look at that for your board chair and helping them run the meetings. Here's another example template, example of a board meeting agenda. This is a fairly formal board meeting, call to order, welcome introductions, committee, leader remarks. The things I like about this is you'll notice it has at the top right, date, time, location. It has the meeting chair. It also has room for the meeting scribe or secretary. I like how it puts right on there meeting purpose, and it also at the top says supporting documents required. So so they know that they have all the information needed to do this. This is a fairly typical board meeting. It's not a required one size fits all. You don't have to follow this format exactly. Another one that I like is this, and if you want these templates, they are Word documents that we can give them to you if you want to email me and contact us and let us know, that's fine. It says formal meeting agenda, but what I like is you have the date, time, location again, you have your objective, you have the roles that people are playing, and then you have type of meeting. And again, there's various types of meeting, and this doesn't mean it's a board meeting or it's a committee meeting. What it means is, are you meeting to share information? Are you meeting to discuss business that you've previously have the information on and now you need to make decisions? Or is this a meeting for training, or is this for a meeting for discovery or exploring new possibilities? So that helps people better understand what role to play as they interact in the meeting. And it's very common that in a meeting, you would have all of these different things happening. So that's why I like this agenda, because it has the agenda item, and then next to the item, it says description. And you can think of that as the description or the purpose of the agenda item. So for example, call to order, this says description. Now that doesn't really, that's, the purpose is open the meeting so that you can have the meeting. I'm trying to think. So let's say you have in here an item, an agenda item may be, strategic, like using our example from October, strategic discussion of UP nonprofit conference. Well, then the description or the purpose is to get board members' insight while it's still fresh, get their insight on their experiences at the conference, and to as a debrief from the conference and help us planning for future years. To be presented by, and you have whoever is facilitating or giving the presentation, and then duration, again, that's the time you plan to spend in that agenda item section. Here's another one. It says informal. The thing I like about this, it's really interesting because you have, the usual information at the top. I really like how it has please read and please bring, and I'm going to try to highlight those on here, and it'll be a miracle if there. Please read, and it says new client relations manual, and please bring your laptops and reports. And so this is nice because it helps people be more prepared. This is a completely different agenda format, and I find it fascinating because I like how it shows you have at the top, you have your actions from the previous meeting, which could be considered old business. You have agenda items, which could be considered new business. And then you have new action items, and those are what would be like next steps coming out of the meeting. What is to be done next, and who is to do it, and what's the deadline for getting it done. So this is a really great agenda to help, especially in my opinion, with all volunteer organizations. I think it's a great way to help stay organized because you have so many things that you're all doing and wearing so many different hats, that this is a way to kind of organize it between old business or ongoing business, things that are new that you need to discuss, and then who's committed to do what by X date, by what deadline. And so the new action items then on the next board meeting, the new action items roll up and become action items from the previous meeting. So you can kind of see how it's cyclical. Oh. Trouble is now I can't see my mouse to move me forward. Victoria, can you take over my slides by chance?
I can't, but if you use your arrow key on the keyboard, you might be able to advance it.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Oh, there's my, okay. Because for some reason my arrow key, there we go. Oh, and how funny the highlight stays up there. So lesson learned, Amy's not going to do highlighting again unless she practices a lot before the next webinar. So I apologize, you're all seeing my playing at technology that didn't quite work out so well. But I found this slide and I just absolutely loved it, because when you think about it, all group work really boils down to people and relationships. And you want to make sure in your meetings that you create a safe space for people to be able to discuss things and to feel the freedom to disagree if they disagree with something, and to be able to voice concerns if they have a concern. There's something that's called 7 norms of collaboration, and that's from thinking collaboratively. And I almost went through them, but then I thought that, this is already a lot of content. But it's things like paraphrasing what someone else is saying, posing questions, putting your ideas on the table, paying attention to yourself and what's your body language and how are you interacting with others, and paying attention to others. If someone really looks uncomfortable, then maybe you could ask, are you okay? Or, is there something on your mind that you would like to say? And the biggest, I love this last one, the biggest one is presuming positive intentions. And I really like that, presuming positive intentions. What? Oh, Victoria's coming to my rescue again. Thank you, Victoria. You can go to the next slide she's wonderful. And I'm not saying that sarcastically at all. And those of you that know her, are lucky enough to know her, know that she's wonderful. So around the meeting table, there's essentially 3 key roles around the meeting table during a board meeting. You have your chair, you have your CEO, and you have your board, or you have your president, executive director, and other board members or trustees. Then there's several different names for each of those roles that are interchangeable. But if you look at the chair's role is to facilitate. They are facilitator of the meeting. They are to guide the board members through this meeting. Also to equip the board. In other words, make sure that the board is ready for the meeting. And I'm not saying they have to call every board member and ask, did you read your packet? But the board chair needs to be that accountability factor to the CEO to make sure that board members are able to be prepared in advance. And so it's really a mutual understanding and relationship between the chair and the CEO working together on board meetings and helping as a CEO, I help my board do their job, and they in turn lead and help provide direction for me so that I can do my job. And it's a very healthy relationship. The chair, as I said, supports the CEO. The chair, you want the chair to support the CEO. You need to have a good chair-CEO relationship, and that's coming up in a future webinar as well. So if you have issues there, I encourage you to attend. Now the CEO, this is somewhat difficult in the sense that there's only 2 boxes there, because if you think about it, and I'm speaking to all of you nonprofit employees, especially you CEOs and executive directors, this is the board's meeting. This is not your meeting as staff, this is the board's meeting. So you are there as a board, whether you're a voting board member or not, you're there in support of the chair and to answer questions that may come up of the board. And you can give your opinions and whatnot, especially if you're a voting member, you can definitely give your opinion and obviously you can vote, but you are not there to talk the whole meeting or to drive the meeting. The chair facilitates the meeting. And then the rest of the board members, as I talked about being prepared, stay present. So put technology away if it's distracting you, take notes if you need to, but stay present in the meeting, be involved the whole time and participate in the meeting. So now, how do you stay on track? This is gonna look a little funky, but hang with me for a minute on this meeting hieroglyphics. And then there's a technique called third point that I'll explain. And then this is also when we're getting into a little bit of parliamentary procedure. But if you think about a meeting, any meeting, not just your board meetings, but if you think about meetings, sometimes it can seem like a circus because there are a multitude of diverse animals around the table. A nicer way to think of it is a board. When you're in session and functioning as a governing board, you are like one body, but our bodies, if you think about a human body, we all have different parts. So for example, the eyes, they don't serve the same function and they don't have the same skills as the thumbs, but our eyes and our thumbs are equally important. And so that's one way you want to view all of your members around the table, is to capture their strengths and build on their strengths and recognize that everyone is equitable there. Then on the other side is a brain with the network connections there, and that's to symbolize that people process differently. They think differently. The way they process is different. That's why I encourage you to have a board packet distributed ahead of time, and that way they can, people that need to really sit and read things ahead of time can take time to process, and people that like to just talk off the top of their head, I'm not going to mention Trump or anything like that, but someone like that, well, you know, they think differently as well. And neither is good or bad, although it can be embarrassing. Neither is good or bad, but just be cognizant, especially as a chair, be cognizant that people have differences, obviously, but you're all there for the same purpose, which kind of goes back to that collaboration slide that I showed. Oh, and I just talked about this, the multi-headed animal, or the multi-animal syndrome, and then the dual constructs, how people look at content and then how they process information. So now I'm going through tips to kind of help keep the meetings on track, and the first slide really covers the multi-animal picture that I mentioned, as far as everyone having differences, and that there's sometimes your meetings can feel like a circus. And so let's say that you are having a heated discussion. So maybe the facilitator says, let's take a 10-minute break and then come back and discuss this issue. You know, just let everyone cool down a little bit. You have introverts that are in your circle of board members. Ask them what his or her thoughts are, or ask them to prep them ahead of time for that. In other words, before the meeting, say, hey, we're going to discuss this new program that we're thinking about launching, and I really like your opinion and expertise, so would you make sure and read that part of the board packet? Because then they feel a little more prepared. They don't feel like they're being put on the spot during the meeting, but they're still able to contribute. Because introverts are often overlooked, unfortunately, and they have a lot of great information to share with those of us that just tend to blabber. That's me in that category. Chaos. If there's just a lot of chaos going on, this happens. Too many people are speaking at once. Let's say there's just people just aren't behaving well in the meeting. There's side conversations, or they're interrupting each other. As a facilitator or as another board member, you can just call it out. Don't call out the specific people, but you can just say, excuse me, just a minute, there are too many people speaking at once. Mr. or Mrs. Chair, who has the floor? In other words, who has the authority to be discussing? Or we have a lot of sidebar conversations going on and it's making it difficult for me to concentrate. Can we, have those discussions somewhere else? Or is there something that you were saying in those sidebars, and turn to whoever was discussing and say, is there something you would like to share with the group? Because that behavior is rude and unproductive. I mean, don't add that last part. That was the Amy Quinn opinion. And then you have the people that always get off topic and they repeat it because it is on their brain and they can't seem to settle it, and so they just bring it up over and over and over. And so you can say, okay, and don't call them a parakeet. I'm using this as an example, but you can just say, may we record your point or your concern or your comment and take it to a committee to follow up. Put it on some type of parking lot. The key is to make sure the person feels heard and that you did hear them, and that, okay, but we will follow up. We don't want that to get us off track tonight. But, you're important. Your comments are important. We just need to focus on other things right at this minute for to be effective in our board meeting. And then same with a random issue. You know, you have rabbits that just hop here, there, and everywhere, and they're hopping all over. And so someone brings up, you know, you're talking about programming for the future, and someone brings up, but what about, I don't know, what about recruiting new board members? If we're going to have more programs, maybe we need to change our bylaws to have more board members so we can have more oversight of our expanded programs. And it's like, okay, that's a very good comment, but it's getting you off topic. And so you can just say, you know, we agreed to discuss XYZ, or if you look at your agenda, you can see we're on this item. And if you would like, we can add it to a future agenda and kind of go from there. Here, the facilitator, as chair, you have a big duty because you're constantly monitoring the room. You're trying to help the board conduct business, have good discussion, lead the organization forward with all these different dynamics going on and people processing in a different, you know, all different ways. And so sometimes you're in the middle of a meeting and, you know, you and kind of your peers are looking around and being like, what's going on, or what are we supposed to do? As a board member, you can assist, quote unquote, the chair, or as chairs, this is a way to assist in the facilitating of the meeting. Here's some, if there's unclear objectives during the meeting, you can just, you know, are we sharing knowledge? Are we brainstorming potential solutions? Are we supposed to be making a decision? You know, I'm kind of confused what my role is right now and what you want, what the objective is for this agenda item. If you're trying to come to a consensus, then, and the chair is struggling to rein everyone in, and you have an idea, then you can say, may I suggest a process for resolving this? And then whatever process you have that you've thought of, then you can help move the meeting forward. And sometimes it's good, you know, facilitators have so much going on, the chairs have so much going on, that if you're a board member and you realize, okay, you know what, this is totally going off the rails, instead of just sitting there and thinking this is totally going off the rails and I hate these meetings and I don't enjoy this anymore, take the time to think through some of these things about, okay, what can I do to help move the meeting forward? What can I do to help equip the chair without usurping their authority? Another example is poor time management, and that kind of goes back to Ms. Parakeet and Mr. Rabbit, or people that ramble on. And we will we'll do the third point, and that's a great facilitation tool, the third point. But in short, it's basically, you know, if we plan to complete our agenda, then we need to move on, or, you know, can we table this, or can we ask a committee to look at it, whatever the case may be. And flip-flopping attendees, this is what I was talking about earlier when you're thinking through the meeting purpose, is how much of it are you rehashing? How much are you thinking about or second guessing yourself, or for whatever reason, you're discussing it again when you thought everything was already decided, but for some reason someone brought it up again. You can just say, you know, earlier we decided X, either in this meeting or it's in the minutes of a previous meeting. You know, does anyone have new information that would make it necessary to revisit our decision? And then kind of just move on from there. Or if you're sitting in a meeting and you're confused and you're not sure why a certain item's on the agenda, it's perfectly fine to say, what's the purpose for this agenda item? Again, it's clarifying the objective of why you're spending the time on that agenda item, and also helps you better understand what role you need to play and what context you need to be thinking of. Am I making a decision? Am I brainstorming? Those types of things. So third point, this I learned from adaptive schools, thinking collaboratively, and this is great. Another reason why you either want an agenda up on a flip chart or on a table or printed, or everyone have it in front of them on their computer, whatever the case may be. It's called third point, and it's able, what you do is if someone is getting you off track, or if someone is really having a lengthy discussion about something they feel passionate about, you as a facilitator can say, excuse me, okay, now if you look where we're at the agenda, and you point to the agenda, so then everyone's attention is focused not on you, but where you're pointing. That's why it's called the third point. You move the focus away from you, because that way you're not being the bad guy, it's the agenda. And it's like, okay, the agenda shows we still have these other things to discuss. So as a group, we need to decide, are we going to continue this discussion and not have time for these other things, or do we want to move on? And so it's shifting the focus back to the agenda, and the person that's raising that issue doesn't feel like the bad guy for cutting someone off and saying, no, we need to stick to the agenda. It's a tactful way to do that. So parliamentary procedure, I'm not going over any of how to make a motion, what a quorum is, anything like that, but we do have a 30-minute webinar that I did last year that is, there's a link there, and when you get the materials, you can hot link it. And if you click on it, it's just a 30-minute webinar, and that does cover some of the basic, I call a meeting to order. This is how you make a motion. This is if it needs a second or not. This is what it means, that type of thing. But really, parliamentary procedure is you focus on one thing at a time. And bottom line is you need a way to conduct business that is representative of all your members that are at the table, that's fair and equitable to all, where everyone has a voice, and that it feels like it was conducted efficiently, but yet taking everyone that's at the group, having their opinions where they feel comfortable being able to express their opinion and independently vote the way their conscience tells them to vote. So it is looking at the majority while ensuring the rights of the minority. So everyone has equal access to decision making and to participating. And that's originally Robert's Rules of Order is what I was trained in, and that's originally why it was created, because it's like we need a system, and this was way back, I think, in the UK. We need in Parliament, we need a system where we can be able to discuss and determine business and make decisions that is fair and equitable to all. That's why you use parliamentary procedure. So one thing that you want to be careful of is that you focus only on one procedure. So in other words, I think these were, says focus on, focus on purpose more than procedure. So in other words, that's why I went through that slide on, this is the intent. The intent is to conduct business efficiently while everyone is able to participate and have an equal say. But if you have someone that's very proficient in parliamentary procedure and they're using that as a way to not let everyone have a voice that should have a voice, then they're actually not using parliamentary procedure in the proper way or for the proper. Technically, they may be doing it right, but it's not the purpose that it was created for. So a couple of things to remember is that the rights of the organization supersedes the rights of individual members. And that also kind of goes back to a conflict of interest if you think about that. And you want to think about you're there on behalf of the organization. And it respects the wishes of the majority. There's a lot of times when a decision isn't unanimous. And if you're on the minority side and the vote didn't go the way you wanted, you are still a unit as a board, and so you go along with what the majority said. It doesn't mean that you have to agree, and it doesn't mean that your voice wasn't heard. It's just that if you're voting by majority vote or 2/3 vote, whatever it is, the way whatever motion was passed, you discussed it, that was the decision, now support it. And you don't go outside of the boardroom and, tell a reporter, well, the other board members voted for this, but I didn't vote that way, I didn't like that. That's not being a good board member. That's not adhering to your duty of confidentiality. And it's not proper business conduct. And then again, do what seems fair and equitable. And so I was in a meeting that was one of the worst facilitated meetings that I've ever been in. And they were discussing things and someone had a question, but instead of calling on this person, the facilitator just went ahead and called for the vote. And everyone went ahead and voted and it passed. And then the person said, I have a question. And because she still did, her question hadn't been answered. And so she goes, can I ask my question now? And he goes, sure, you can ask it, but it's not going to change the vote. Now that is not the proper way to use parliamentary procedure. Here again, the purpose is to have a collaborative, efficient discussion where you feel like everyone's conducting things. Whoops, I have that in there twice. Correctly. Now, this is also why I say the rules, quote unquote rules, can be modified to fit the needs of the individual group. And really, it depends on your group. Some people are real formal and they, in meetings, they say, I move to such and such, or I make a motion to, let's say, to approve the agenda. And someone says support and you vote. I've been in meetings where the facilitator will say, can I get a motion to approve the agenda? And someone will say, so move. In other words, I'll make that motion, but I'm not going to take the time to repeat, I move that we approve the agenda. So even though verbatim it isn't what Robert's Rules of Order or whatever parliamentary procedure you're following, that's okay as long as everyone has the understanding that that's what it means and that's what we're doing. It wouldn't be okay if the facilitator was talking so quickly that it felt like you were at an auction and the facilitator was an auctioneer that just kept the meeting going so fast you couldn't keep up. So you can kind of modify these things and work to educate the group, and as a group, talk through this is what we do. And we have at Grow and Lead, we have youth board members, 16 years old and to 18 years old, so that they are full-fledged voting members of the board. And I have an orientation with them before they start, and I talk to them about, this is how you make a motion, this is what discussion means, this is how we conduct business, and that you are expected to vote, and we do expect you to voice your opinion, and that type of thing. So they're equipped to participate in meetings, and they have a better understanding of how our organization conducts business. One key thing to keep in mind is that your bylaws of your organization always take precedent over Robert's Rules of Order or Sturgis or whatever parliamentary procedure you're following. And then motions have ranks. And that means that some motions rank higher than others. So if you move to approve the finance report and you're discussing it and someone says, I call for the vote, or I call to order for order, I call for the vote, something like that. It's slipping my mind off the top of my head. But that ranks above the motion that's on the floor for approving and discussing and approving the finance committee report. And so the chair would say, a vote has been called, so discussion no longer continues. All those in favor of approving the finance committee report say aye, yada, yada. So certain motions have certain priorities. And that's a way you can help keep meetings on track, is doing things like, I call to order. And again, it doesn't have to be that formal. You can say, I call to order, meaning I'm making the motion that says we need to stop discussing this and just vote on it. That's fine. You're educating your peers about the types of parliamentary procedure you're using, and you're moving the organization through its business more efficiently. Something else to keep in mind is that as a chair or a facilitator, you're the facilitator. You don't make motions and you don't debate. And so you're there to ensure that business is conducted efficiently and equitably. This is just a list of the different sources I use to come up with the information in this webinar, and I left a few minutes for question and answers. Then I would be glad to try to answer any questions you may have. Thank you for joining us, and please, you will get an email from us tomorrow, either later tonight or tomorrow, most likely tomorrow. Please complete the evaluation. We only know how to improve if you tell us what worked well and what didn't. Victoria, do we have any questions?
We do have one. And just so everyone knows, there's a question pane in your GoToWebinar panel on the right-hand side of your screen. You can type your questions in there and I will read them to Amy on your behalf. So the first question we have is, could you explain a little bit more about a board packet, what's in it and who prepares it, especially in an all-volunteer organization versus an organization with paid staff?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking. When I say board packet, I'm basically talking about the agenda and any supporting documents that board members may need in order to be prepared to conduct the business that's on the agenda. So for example, it would be the agenda, the meeting minutes from the previous meeting, financial statements, or a treasurer's report, some way to conduct financial oversight of the organization. If you're voting on a new policy, then you want a copy of that policy in what we call the packet. And even though I refer to it as a board packet, it doesn't have to be an actual binded packet of paper. You can have paper that you snail mail to board members. It can be emailed to board members. You could upload it to a Google Docs. It's whatever works for your organization. But in an all volunteer organization, I would say you still have roles. So the chair would look at setting the agenda, and I would recommend, depending on how your organization operates, I would recommend, like, as an executive committee, you get together and discuss what do we want on the agenda, and how much time are we going to allot for different items, what is our purpose for the meeting, what objectives do we want to accomplish during this meeting, and together you can set the agenda and whatnot. Then to come up with the supporting documents, that depends on what the supporting document is. For example, the treasurer would come up with the financial reports. If you have a policy change, then that would most likely be your secretary. You may have your vice chair that says, I'll volunteer to write up this a summary of our last fundraising event so that the rest of the board knows and you have documentation of it. If that's, let's say, one of your agenda items is debriefing your recent fundraising event. So I hope that helps. Let me know if you have further questions or if I didn't answer your question.
Thanks, Amy. We have a couple questions about the materials used. And so the answers to those are yes, the webinar is recorded, and yes, you will get a copy of the slides. I'll email those out tomorrow morning, probably later morning. The webinar will have to be uploaded to YouTube. So you'll get a link along with the presentation slides, and you'll also have the evaluation that Amy talked about earlier in that email. And if this was really valuable and you feel like it's something your entire board or a committee or any meeting that you attend should hear in person. If you're a member of Grow and Lead, we do offer evaluation of meetings, I guess you'd call it. You can use your member benefits to have that done, and we can come in and kind of coach through the meeting and give suggestions while the meeting is taking place, or we can come in and present this exact presentation to your board or group. So a couple ways that you can um, use the information further on down the road. And because I was talking, we got another question. Awesome. All right. So Amy, here's one for you. I understand that the chair does not make motions or debate, but can he or she raise issues that are related to the debate to expand it or help with processing?
In my opinion, yes. And the reason I say in my opinion is because off the top of my head, I'm not sure what the parliamentarians would say, what Robert's Rules of Order or Sturgis or policy, whatever policy you're following for your parliamentary procedure. However, if it is to forward the process, to help people think through some things, then yes, that's no problem. The reason why parliamentary procedure usually says that board chairs cannot debate is basically they don't want a board chair that railroads the conversation. Since technically the board chair is in charge of who gets to talk, if you have a board chair that does all the talking and that does all the debating, that's not representing the group in a fair and equitable way. So I would say yes, but then I would also say the rest of the board members present have the authority if the board chair suddenly takes off and starts hijacking the meeting. The rest of the board members have the authority to and responsibility, frankly, to to ask the chair to facilitate and hold back on their personal comments. One thing I wanted to mention, Victoria made me think of this. I've also had nonprofits ask me to come and either help facilitate or to facilitate meetings that they think are going to be really contentious. Sometimes having a third party in the room helps people behave better. And so that's something we can do as one of your member benefits if you so choose. Or like Victoria said, just having us come in and sit in on a meeting and see, almost like audit it, if you will, and share some thoughts, ideas, whatever the case may be of how we could help you have more efficient meetings, because we all know no one likes to have more meetings and longer meetings.
All right, I don't see any more questions coming through. So thank you everyone that attended today's webinar. We're excited to be presenting Board Development Month. We have 2 more coming up. Next Wednesday, we'll be talking about ambassadorship and how you can move your mission forward through sharing what your work is on a board of directors. And then, like Amy talked about earlier, we will have board chair and CEO relationship, which will be an expanded version of the 30-minute presentation that took place in early December. That one was really well received and we got a lot of questions, so we've expanded it and we'll be representing it the last Wednesday in January. And those will be free as well. So thank you again. Watch for my email in the morning and have a wonderful remainder of your evening. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.